Sorry, madam. Asengiphinde ngawenza ngisangifa ehlale la eceleni. La. Alright. Siyabonga. Sanibonani. Siyaphila njani? Yeah.
Ngisaphila wa. Hayi siyaphila. Uyangizwa? Okay. Should I go into the mic or ngiright ngihlela nje? Okay, perfect. Engathi kuzoba busy nje ngoDecember.
Kuzoba busy.
Kuzoba busy kakhulu.
Unyaka webhizi. Unyaka wemisindo.
Too much.
Amagagas.
My phone is away. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Daily News exclusive. My name is Ayanda Mdluli, and today we are in conversation with Dr. Zweli Mkhize, an astute and well-experienced government official and very senior ANC member, former Treasurer General of the ANC, former Minister of Health, former Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, the former leader of government business in KZN. Welcome to our conversation. It's such an honor to be sitting here with you today.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege.
Thank you. You know, before this interview, I was actually thinking on how, we can just go about getting people to understand where it is that we come from, as as a province. And I think just looking at your history and the role that you've played in KwaZulu-Natal, I think it would be so pertinent and so prudent if you could maybe just take us through the days of transition in the early and mid 1990s, which were arguably one of the most difficult periods in our young democracy, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. Can you just highlight for us what was your role in the ANC at the time?
I have been part of the ANC for as far back as 1978 when I was recruited into the underground. Then we worked as students, activists, and at that time there were no organizations, political organizations. So we used a number of existing structures such as the committees, civic committees, and students and so on, until the UDF was then formed. And then, of course, that became the pen under which a lot of activities were taking place. This was a time of transition when people were rejecting the homeland government, were rejecting the domination of the black townships with the white administration, and at the same time the forceful movement of people from townships into the Bantustan government. And in this case, there were civic bodies that actually formed to fight that. As a result, the kind of fight went to a conflict between communities and councillors. Now, the councillors tended to be not part of what we call the broad liberation movement, and some of them were members of the IFP, and so people were rejecting them, and then there started to be a conflict between them. That conflict escalated. It became a conflict between, two groups of people: those who were supporting UDF, those who were supporting mostly the IFP, and then it created a lot of tension. And as we look back now, we know that the people who fomented it was actually the apartheid government. They actually sponsored it. Police were involved, and now it's a known story because they went around shooting and killing people and so on. So over a period, I left South Africa in 1985, in 1986, mainly because I was part of the underground military structures of the ANC. So units were exposed, and I had to move out. But the violence continued throughout all of that time. And so when we returned in 1991, we found that the tension between ANC and IFP was so much, the violence was so bad, but also it was violence throughout mostly KZN, Gauteng, and all the other provinces, but it was concentrated on these two. And it was driven largely by apartheid, what was called then that force, because there were people who were specifically primed to go and start the fights and cause committees to fight and so on. So on our return, the first thing that we had to do was to deal with trying to stop the violence. And the violence was manifested in different ways. But in my village, for example, there used to be so much of violence, and it was related to what we call mob justice at the time. So the first task when I got in, Comrade Harry Kwala said to me, Mama, feel Indaba. Indaba was where people used to actually go and fight and get killed and so on. Where to do that, to stop people from taking law into their own hands, was where they were like fed up, literally. But then the fighting was going on, and it really took a form of us having to negotiate now between ANC and IFP. And President Zuma started what was called Loam Follows the Accord with the IFP, with Minister of the IFP, I remember the name just now. And then later on, this was expanded to Hammersdale. Even here, it was a straightforward problem of the police who were actually fomenting violence. And so a guy called Roy Roy Ngobo actually shot and killed his commander, who was Del Blanche, because they were arming people and disarming others and forcing them to fight and so on. And then Dr. Michel Khadebe and Sipom Laba were involved in that. So all of us were now involved in going around to talk to different, communities to settle the fights. Now I was in the Midlands, and so it was our responsibility to make sure that the peace between ANC, IFP is restored, and we had to deal with some of the leaders who were quite feared from the IFP.
Yeah, because now that's going to be my next question. I mean, obviously things were so tense at that particular time. So I mean, especially in the late 80s, early 90s to the mid and late 90s. Can you just take us through how did you navigate through that violence, and what role did you play in ending it?
Yes. I was wanting to remember the name of Minister Steg of the IFP. That's where the thing started. Subsequently, it was now President Zuma and Dr. Mdluli. So we were part of the first, the executive of the province, and so it was a government of national unity. So we are forced now to preside over the peace process between the two parties. So I recall that one of the main meetings were when I was part of the delegation of the ANC that had to go and sit with the IFP, negotiate on a continuous basis. It was quite hard meetings between us, led on our side by President Zuma and the other side by Dr. Frank Mdluli. And then you had like the likes of Manda Shabalala, Prince Gideon Zulu, a number of them, and of course on our side, Sfiso Kabile, the San Makai, and all of them, until we came to agree. And our role was to ultimately say, okay, we agree that there should not have been a fight between the ANC and the IFP in the first instance. That the misunderstanding that arose had arisen because the ANC had actually led to the formation of the IFP, and the IFP took its own direction, and the ANC, members who grew up had this big difference of opinion, and of course then the apartheid government took advantage of all of that, and so we agreed that we must stop that. So we had to now move from township to township, from area to area, to tell people to stop the fight. And so my role also there was that, because I was part of the executive in the ANC and in the government, but to go around into different areas to actually get people to stop the fight. And so we had to largely deal with leaders of the IFP, like VP Ndlovu, who were there, the others like David Ntombela, Umahlobo, and a lot of others. So we had to deal with that problem. It took us a while. Ultimately, we had come to an agreement that we need to even get monuments together where the ANC IFP would put all the victims together and so on. Unfortunately, it didn't go as far as that in practice, but that's what happened. Then something else cropped up in the ANC, and that was now the fight, which was now involving ANC members. But what actually became an issue was that for members, initially the ANC was almost divided, with some were, looking at the peace-making initiatives more as a betraying the people who have been attacked and killed in violence. It took us a long time to say, actually, primarily our struggle was never about fighting black people, fighting black people. It was about destroying the system. And so this is now the wrong direction that we're taking. And it created tensions. Almost you could end up with some who supported the peaceful process and the others were not. But over a period, we all agreed onto that. And so my role then, because I was part of the Midlands, was to deal with the people who were out in Makongo, where there were problems, Vulindlela, and also link up with Hammarsdale, Tony Brook, Kaupo, Richmond, and so on. So that was largely my role at the time to deal with wherever there was a conflict, then we would go out there and try and resolve it. And the code was clear, we still needed to stop our members from coming up with, the kind of inflammatory language that would make people fight. Our role to tell people to accept different T-shirts. People were wearing different T-shirts and they belong to different organizations. They had to actually be accepted as normal. The family could have people to belong to different organizations, and that should be fine. And I think we had. It was quite difficult because even as we started inside the legislature, sometimes we would actually have the tension amongst the leaders to the extent that we would start shouting at each other, even making, singing slogans inside the legislature. In one instance, in fact, some two members actually threw guns at each other, and we had to come in and raise the issue at that level. And the point was creating this atmosphere of tolerance and peaceful coexistence of parties. I think it's a long way that we have come from. There many lives were lost, and we actually made it ultimately normal for people to live without any political tensions, hatred, and all of it.
You've mentioned. I'm so glad we're having this conversation because, especially for the benefits of the younger generation, who are not aware of some of the historical aspects, of the violence that we went through at the time. Can you perhaps just highlight, give us some insights into the era of Sfiso Nkabinde, the UDM, and the ANC, and Richmond in KZN. If you could give us some insights and some knowledge about what it is that transpired at the time and the impact that had and the role that you played in curtailing those series of events.
Yes. Now, what had happened is that there was a lot of violence in Richmond. And originally, it started like with what you call defense committees, STUs, or self-defense units. And then later, it started involving conflicts amongst the comrades. And amongst the people who got killed was the chairman of the ANC Youth League, who was residing in Richmond. Three of them were killed.
You remember that the name of
Yes, it was Mzwandile Mbogwa.
Oh yes, yes.
Mzwandile Mbogwa. He got killed with two others who were part of the youth leadership. So that sparked a huge outrage amongst the members of the ANC and youth at the time, such that in fact, when after that had happened, in fact, there was a standoff inside the ANC office where the people who were part of the team that were the bodyguard of Harry Gwala and those who were of Sifiso Nkabinde actually kind of threw guns at each other. That ultimately led to some of them having to be moved up to go and serve at the national office to try and defuse the matter. But part of that was the violence that was continuing in Richmond, and then some of the other areas around it. Then there was a story that was reported to the ANC about the fact that Nkabinde had worked with the police prior to the unveiling of the ANC. And so the ANC took a stand to remove him from the membership and leadership of the organization. And when he moved out, then of course violence started in the area of Richmond. So many people were actually killed. In fact, from the time that he had been removed, the murders that started with a deputy mayor called Van der Beek, and then he was killed midnight. And then by the time the violence stopped, 103 people had actually been killed. And then there were some areas, during the days of the ANC-IFU was what was called no-go areas. So you could only go into this area as ANC. If you're IFP, you actually would be harmed. If you it was a no-go area for the IFP, then you could be harmed if you're ANC. Now, Richmond almost turned out to be like that, where even within members of the ANC, there was no, people could not actually go in there. And so then it now forced me, because I was one of the few remaining leaders who were part of the Midlands, to move from area to area to explain to people that there should be no fighting, and we must stop the violence amongst the members, and that everyone must actually be loyal to the community, to the ANC, and keep peace in the community. So we moved around working on that kind of issue. So it also meant now that we had to work together with the police to try and investigate those murders. It was quite gruesome in a number of areas, because I recall in one of the instances was a guy who was just killed. They actually killed with an AK with 32 rounds of ammunition. They all emptied into one person. I mean, the man would have died with one, but that was the kind of severity now of this kind of violence that was coming up. In one instance, where a lady who was a Mkokeli, a leader in the church, and in the house she was shot and killed, and there was a 5-year-old kid who, on his hands, he had bullets through the hand with a ring of, gun smoke around it, and then the bullet went through the heart. So it looks like he put his hand on the
To
gun
try and stop the bullets. Oh my
bullets.
God.
So it was quite gruesome as it
Yeah.
were. So we were then all now involved trying to
Yes.
help to diffuse this violence, and it took quite a while. And the one instance was an instance of what one family were called the Ndabezit family. They were having a memorial service at night, and then right at night, this was now around 1996 or so, it's 97 or so. But what happened was, when the people came in, they came with guns and shot a lot of people and killed them. And then the one guy was leading the execution. He was a guy we knew, because he was also part of he had been in the army. He took leave from the army to come and join this fight. This fight. And so the one lady, Mrs. Ngabesika, gives me a call around 2 in the morning. He said, they are busy killing us, shooting us, and now they've gone out because this guy's gun is jammed. And but he's talking outside to say, look, doesn't matter, the gun is jammed. They must get the axes and pangas to come and finish him off. So they came back with the pangas and they hit her on the leg, and then at the same time, then the police unit, the army unit, came over and started shining lights. So they moved over. So this guy was moving out, and as he was moving out, the soldiers had the night vigil equipment, and he knelt down to try and unlock his gun that had actually jammed. And then the police shot him, and he died on the army shot him, and he died on the spot. And after that, then there was a group of youngsters who took a decision to make a plot to assassinate Mr. Gawinde, and then he was then killed. And so it was quite a very untenable situation.
And then obviously his death as well led to the death of so many other people in such a brutal manner.
His death he was about 103rd person from the first person who died. After that, of course, the violence had stopped. It stopped after his death. But before then, there'd already been about 100 people who had been killed. Now, so Richmond had seen the first wave of violence. That wave of violence was ANC and IFP. And in that process, we got the peace brokered between ANC and IFP. So
then there was UDM.
Then the UD, when Sifiso Kabila was then removed from the ANC, he went to join the UDM. That's how the UDM came about. Because what happened was, as soon as he was removed, a number of councillors were killed, and then others were made to resign. And then there was a by-election, and then brought people back there. But then when he was coming to contest next time, he was now contesting not now as ANC, but as UDM. So that created tension between the ANC and UDM, but actually it was a tension, it was an ANC tension that extended to the new party that had been brought on board. But we were able to ultimately get all the families, Gawinde family, the Doe families, the Visitor families, all of those that had lost, we actually had a process of reconciliation, such that the people who were involved in murders were actually released and they went to go and seek pardon from those communities. And then all of them are back to the community. Of course, now we've still got petty crime, but it was quite a process to get religious leaders and communities to reconcile the different groups. So those who were part of um, those who were arrested and charged. Incidentally, I met 2 days ago with one of the chief investigators who was investigating Richmond. Was a guy was called Pushi Elabra. He was the guy who actually was involved for arrest to try and contain that whole situation. So there were a number of others who were very helpful. There was even the army. There was a guy who was called Major Delas Kosala, who was working from the army side. It was a whole multidisciplinary team that had to go and sit there. So that when I was premier afterwards, we then started a program now to try and get the community to lift off from there, trying to create self-sustainable programs of working with rebuilding the town and getting new investment into the town to create jobs and so on. It has been very unfortunate, but there's been a long history of trauma.
Yeah, and which now brings me to my next point. As we wrap up the sort of history lesson that we're having now, obviously when you were the premier, there are those who say that the province was in kind of an era of stability and growth under your premiership. And there are those who say otherwise, who hold a different view, who say no, but there are so many corruption allegations during, officials in the province during the time. Some say KZN was very stable back then. So during your time as the premier of KZN and also as the leader of government business, what do you feel you got right and what do you feel you got wrong?
Firstly, I think if you are part of government and the legislature, one thing that's important is to keep a cordial relationship of respect amongst the different parties. Because we need to accept firstly that everyone, it doesn't matter whether we dislike each other as members of different parties, but everyone of them got in through the votes. The same votes that got us in would have got the next party in. So it's important to respect that. And it's important because we voted for a multi-party democracy where people have got a right to choose across different parties. And that issue was important during those days because the language of how we addressed each other. If you had parties talking in parliament, they debate, and so people are listening, they follow. But if parties are acrimonious and they fight and they are castigating each other and insulting, the followers out there don't have the time for the argument. They start the fight. They fight, and therefore we felt that the language of the leaders actually has got an impact on the peace that you can manage or maintain in the villages and the communities. And so the first thing for me was that you need a leadership that is able to show respect for different parties. And in any case, I think in terms of governance, you would benefit more by listening to all the other parties to hear how that compares with your policies, with your programs and so on, because you cannot always know everything, but you can always be found. You can find someone that can raise something that can say, oh, there's a point there, let's go correct it. So that's the one issue. The second issue is that we need to bring together government departments to work together as a team. One of the things that used to be a problem is that you get a deployment of transport to go to a community, want to talk to the community, they want to talk about the road, and 2 weeks later, the one wanting to talk about the school, the other week, another one's coming to talk about the clinic, and they're talking about this thing in different areas. They're not even aware that each one is talking to the community. The community gets exhausted and confused. So one of the things that's important is working together of government, and the next one is government working with the people. So we started a program which we called Operation Sukuma Sakhe. Now that was actually to mobilize government to work together in different spheres, which means from municipal, provincial, and national in one area, and then at the same time work with the communities. Now that problem became very popular for a number of reasons. Firstly, people could talk to the government officials directly, and therefore they could influence the thinking and the working of the program. And then at the same time, departments could talk together, could sit together and talk together about how to manage challenges in a particular community. That improved so much of the relations that you ended up with less of tensions in the communities with protests and violent protests and so on. So that was one thing that worked. And government working with business was very important. So we what was called growth coalition. Now that growth coalition had actually started at the time of Premier Ndebele because the ANC was taking over eThekwini and everyone was scared of the ANC. So we then called a meeting with business to say, look, our interest is the development of the city. Our interest is creating jobs. Our interest is the welfare of everybody. Now we don't fear the ANC. Come, let's talk. What is it that needs to be done? So we ended up with a culture of business must come and lay out their plans on the table. What do they want to do? And government, what do they expect from government? And government would say, well, we can do this, we don't like that. And then together, everyone would start in getting involved in unlocking the bottlenecks that created a delay in investment and fast-tracked a number of things. As a result of that, the spirit now in the country, in the province, was that firstly, amongst the political parties and communities, there was peace. Secondly, between government and the private sector, there was cooperation and a degree of mutual trust and confidence. And thirdly, between the government and the communities, there was a mutual understanding and good communication. So you could actually get things to happen as everyone was expecting. I think that kind of approach becomes still very relevant in managing issues, particularly with issues of crime. I can give you an example how we deal with crime. We went to Chatsworth, and the issue was drugs.
Yeah, no, Chatsworth is very notorious.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, for that.
Drug trafficking. So then we went in there with one fellow who used to be part of the stable. At some point, he was one of the editors in the stable. I think his name was Akachi, Brown Dev.
Yes, yeah. I think he's the editor of the Post.
He's the editor
of the Post now. Yes.
So we then had an agreement that they wanted to give a number for the community to report problems. Now, we as government wanted information so that the police know where to find the criminals. So we ended up with this information. A lot of it came, and then I went to the meeting where we said to the editor, hand it over to the police, and the police took the information. And when they did, they actually found detailed information about how to take the criminal. Within that operation, they were able to arrest people who had been on the run for 7 years, drug lords. And the active number that they gave to the community. So when the drug lords would come to one area and take the drugs and put them there, they would tell them, go upstairs in the bedroom, that's where the stuff is. Or then the police come, as soon as the police come, they say, no, the stuff has been moved to 3 houses down the road. And the police went up there. The arrest rate went very high because the community was the one that was giving the intelligence. So these issues were part of what was making the working in the province very successful. And you recall that if there's peaceful coexistence of parties, then there's no tension which is generated by party political conflict. Then if there is cooperation between the public sector and the private sector, then you've got ease of movement of investment and job creation opportunities. And then if you've got community also plugged in there, then you are able to actually all move together at a time. And so we ended up with quite a bit of growth and job creation, and we were able to get initiatives.
So
cooperatives and also the community.
So I mean, I'm just taken aback, with your wealth of knowledge and insight into how everything worked and how everything was working. But obviously, when we look at things as they stand today, and we look at the province, we look at the rates of crime, we look at how the issue of drugs has decimated our communities, we look at the future of our youth as a result of the issues around crime and all of that. Where did we get it so wrong? I mean, what went wrong in your view? What happened? I mean, KZN is notorious for such violent crime, especially against vulnerable women and children. And you know what I'm talking about with everything that we read in our newspapers and we see in the media. What happened in your view?
Look, it's difficult to sit here and pontificate about what might have gone wrong. I think things are very complex in society. But I think the formula that we had, if any of those networks get unraveled, it makes government even less effective. So I think it's one issue that's important. But secondly, it's important also that at a national level, national government level, there should be a very strong supportive approach towards the drive to push for investments and growth, towards the drive towards ensuring that there's empowerment of marginalized community, towards the drive of supporting, job creation programs and the working of the police. But the police can never work alone. They need to work together with the community, and if they do, then they are able to deal with the issues. But you can never deal with crime if you can't deal with employment and poverty. It's all one chain. And so if you want to break the chain, you must first break the chain of poverty and break the chain of unemployment, because the bulk of the challenges that we face are people who start with petty crime because that's the only way they can survive. I'll give you another example. When we went to, we hosted a mbizo of a community in Wentworth and Sydney, largely colored community, Mariam Reach and so on. And then I was asked to sit and be hosted by one old man, and I can still remember he was called Old Dankis, about 82 years old. I asked him the one question, I said, look, we must deal with this issue of drugs. And he said, I said, drugs and gangs. And he said to me, look, you must not just look at drugs as being the main problem. You must look at poverty as your main problem. A lot of those drug lords are not seen by the community as criminals. They are seen as saviors who give people groceries at the end of the month, who give the children bus fares, who earn pocket money, and so on. Of course, in the process, they also then get a favor of they can hide their drugs for them. So when you arrest a drug lord, people are not seeing just the drug lord; they are looking at the other work that is doing for them, and therefore they'll shield those people. Now, my point therefore is that everything boils down to how do we successfully deal with poverty and unemployment. Because if we don't deal with those, it's going to be more difficult to deal with crime. It's going to be more difficult to deal with problems such as gender-based violence and so on. Because it's a chain of violence that comes from inability to cope, that comes from desire to have stuff that you can't afford, and all of that. So it becomes that kind of problem. My view would be we need to go back to the drawing board and try and reignite the inspiration that comes from combined partnership between communities, business, and public sector.
Okay, and then now I'd like us to move to a more sort of different topic. You've gone through your whole entire life as a political activist, as someone who's got a massive track record in government, in politics. Like the list is so endless. But we don't know Dr. Mkhize, the family man. How's your family doing? How's yeah? Yes, I mean, yeah. Tell us more about your family. How's your wife? How are the kids? How are the grandchildren doing? How's everybody?
Well, no, thank you very much for asking about that.
Yeah.
And I must say, I think we must always know that
Mm,
in life, when everything else is gone, what remains is
mm,
family. And we must always have enough time for the
mm,
family. I wish I had enough
mm,
time for the family. And there are, thank you for asking, but they are okay, they're doing well.
mm,
Um, they've learned to be supportive,
mm,
but also to they've gone through quite a lot of challenges themselves.
mm,
I think we must always know if there's a public figure who gets publicly attacked, the families they feel it. The
mm,
families are the ones
mm,
they feel the pain. They also get attacked because they want to answer things as though they're also part of that government that
mm,
the father is in, and they've
mm,
got nothing to do with it. They don't know. I think it's important to
mm,
always keep that kind of respect of each person, but there's a family there, and try and kind of keep it separate, you know,
mm, mm,
for the sake of the family. And then the other issues is the false accusations. You know, if you
mm,
get out,
mm,
you see there's a new mall that's being built, and then people start saying to your family, "Oh, your father is got money
mm,
now to build a mall." No, he doesn't have, or what you're hiding. Then, or there's a new
mm.
hospital. Somebody gives a call. Doctor, Mr. Mkhize, please give me a job in that hospital. But which hospital? No, no, no. I've heard it.
Yeah.
It's your hospital. Or there's a young man there who's coming up. He's doing
Mm.
a
Medicine,
building,
no. Yeah.
selling building material. So
Mm,
that's Mkhize's thing. So you get a whole lot of accusations that come
mm,
along. But the family remains strong. I think for me, particularly
mm,
throughout this whole journey, through the
mm,
struggle and so on, my wife has been a
mm.
very great supporter. We come a long
For
way
sure. Yeah.
during the days of underground
Mm,
military and during exile
mm,
and to here. She's really been quite amazing and
mm.
a pillar of strength. And so
It's
she would,
amazing.
yeah,
Mm,
but also she would be affected if
mm,
things become a problem.
mm.
You know, to the extent to which even the children, they get to answer questions as small kids in school
At school.
about their parents and about things. So if the parents are talking and are saying bad things about the family, the kids
The
pick it
kids are
up.
listening and they pick
Then
it up,
they go
and
and tell
yes,
the
yes,
kid and
yes.
so on.
Mm,
I know that even during the days of apartheid, it was quite an issue. I was shocked. My son was
mm,
going to the crèche, and then we asked him about kids at school, and he was able to tell us that no, so and so and so and so are comrades, so and so are Freedom Party.
mm,
You
mm,
understand? And they were kids. They were 5 years. Understand?
mm.
So the families get to be dragged always
Yeah.
onto this thing, and quite often
And
unfairly so.
and even children divide themselves along political lines and
Indeed.
along media narratives and
Exactly.
along, and I'm sure the past 2 years, I mean, we all know regarding the whole digital vibes saga. Um, we know the accusations. We know your submissions that you've made, proclaiming your innocence. We know that we've seen the media reports. I mean, we're part of covering everything that's been happening there. So I'm not going to go into details about that. But what I'd just like to know, how has that affected you personally? I mean, you've had to resign as the Minister of Health during arguably one of the most difficult periods in our country, in the middle of a pandemic, and that couldn't have been easy for you. But how has that impacted on you personally? How has it impacted on your family, on your personal life?
Yes.
Mm,
I must say, President, that it's been
mm,
a difficult time, and it's also been there have been lots of lessons about it.
mm,
Just to say briefly that actually the investigation that we're talking about,
mm.
it's an investigation that I had actually initiated.
Yeah.
So in other words, I accepted that there was something that needed to be investigated there. And when we investigated it, and I actually insisted that it must be an independent forensic auditor who's externally based, and I offered that that must be done. As soon as we started that process of investigation, the SIU in the media indicated that they were interested in the investigation. I then wrote to them and said, no, good that you're interested. We'll share with you what we find. And of course, we moved on with the finding, with the process, and we came with the finding. On the 26th of May, 2021, I then went out public and said that I understood the anger of people who were raising the issues and the disappointment, the outrage, and why people had to really be calling us to account. And I thought that was acceptable, and it's important for us to actually lay it out on the table. So I put out the report, and then the report was then given to the SIU and the president, and we started the whole process of initiating disciplinary hearings on the staff, and as well as the recovery of the money. But then the SIU came in and said we must stop that process. They wanted to take the process over, which we allowed, and so on. But soon thereafter, we were then faced with the names of the family members, which started surfacing. But then we've checked on that and found that they were not linked to the contract and such. We were dealing with the people who were involved at a different level and had nothing to do with the contract itself. So all of these matters were then taken up to the president. When I took an issue with the report was when the report came out and started suggesting that I was actually implicated. There was a resolution of cabinet that I reached. There was the staff that I actually instructed that they should do this contract and so on. So I then said to the president, this is a false report, it's baseless, and it's unacceptable, so I'm going to challenge it, and therefore, because I'm going to challenge it, I'm going to resign. Okay. So I resigned at that point. So where we are,
so you did what any self-respecting executive or official should do in a situation like that.
yes.
Resign and deal with your issues, and then once they're done, and then you come back and you.
Yes. And in fact, by the time I resigned, I was no longer dealing with or taking the reports from the department. So I reported it to the SIU. They said, no, fine, it's good that you don't involve yourself, and you must go on with the process of investigation. But I took offense with them when they came up with these issues that I was actually centrally involved, and I said, no, that's unacceptable. And on that basis, then I've taken the report for review. But as things stand now, firstly, on the issue of involvement of family or my son in this matter, that matter was taken up by the Parliamentary Ethics Committee. They have since cleared me on that matter. I actually had a discussion with the registrar of the committee, who told me that, look, they've looked at all documents, they've looked at everything, and there's nothing that's involved with me here. So that throws out one of the issues that the SIU had put up. The second issue was that I then asked the SIU to submit the resolution, because I knew it didn't exist. So then they have not given us. Those are the ones that are in their letters when they say they don't have the document.
Yes.
Now you can't accuse someone or based on a document you don't have, you've never seen. As a matter of fact, I told them that on that day I've got the resolution. It's not what they're saying now. The resolution is something else, and what they say is a lie.
Yeah. So
on that basis, I then in fact raised the issue with them. They have now admitted that they don't have
Yeah. Well, we've seen the documents. The letter from the state's attorney.
Yes.
Yeah. So the letter, they clearly say that they don't have it, or it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And now the issue is that initially the set was classified, and said no, all of the documents have been declassified. Why don't you ask for it to be declassified? So that's the one issue. Then the third one was that the people who have been charged for issuing the contract were the senior officials of the department. Now, the main witness there was SIU, and the ultimate conclusion was that there was negligence and
Mhm.
wrong contract, and then they actually closed the issue. But in that discussion, in that disciplinary hearing, there was no evidence that was implicating Mkhize. So it
Yeah.
drops all of these issues that they actually raised, as it were. That's why then the report had to be taken
Yeah.
to court to be set aside.
So now, with this matter then, and them admitting that they don't have the documents, because the entire finding is based
On that.
off that, right? So now they've admitted that they don't have it. So this essentially means there's no case against you.
Well, in fact, it means that they will not,
Or
It means that they don't have a basis
Okay.
for a case on me. In fact, the Hawks also were asked, and Hawks said they're not investigating Mkhize.
Okay.
And so that's really the status of
So
this issue.
so are you okay, maybe just some context before I put this question to you. The SIU, in our coverage of the Digital Vibes saga, we uncovered the fact that there were some others who were falsely implicated. There's a government spokesperson, Ndabezinhle Sibiya, who was falsely implicated as an owner of Sotobe Media, for instance. And then that was found out to be false. The SIU and another media publication had to apologize and they had to withdraw all of that. And obviously, there were issues around
By the
backlash
reference,
and legal action, and so are you considering suing the SIU or taking legal action against them?
I'm taking one step at a time, but just for
Yeah.
a matter of interest. When I went there, when I went to this first interview, I wasn't quite aware. But what happened was that they raised the issue of Sotobe and Ndabezinhle. They said,
Yes, yes.
it's not true. I don't know those companies, but this guy, this one, I doubt what you're saying is true. And they just ignored it. Understand? Now, quietly, what made us more suspicious, and particularly my lawyer advocate, Jeremy QC, was the one who was sitting next to me. And then he went around and took on his post, went on the side, and was talking with Warren Moore, advocate Warren Moore, and said, what are you going to do? What do you want to do with this case? With Dr. Mkhize? And then this guy said to him, flippantly, we want to do an Isma Hashwili on him. Now, what's an Isma Hashwili? He said, no, all you do is pull a number of people and prove that they are related to the guy, and then put him at the center and charge him.
Imagine.
You know the.
So they call that an Esma Khashul.
Yeah, that's what he told me. Now, I hear it from my lawyer.
Yeah.
And then, so immediately my lawyer said, no. Write a letter to the president and tell him that we don't know what this report is going to come as. But we will challenge it because we already can see there's a problem. He said, told me on the first day instead. And then on the next communication to the SIU, he actually wrote them an opinion as to how the Poker Act works, and it doesn't work in the way they were saying. All of that information was given to them, but when we were supposed to, they were throwing a lot of questions at us. But when we said, okay, we'll bring you answers. When we tried to bring the answers, they were no longer interested. So until the chairperson who was presiding over that hearing forced the SIU to take the evidence. And they take the evidence at 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the same day. At 6 o'clock, the report was with the president. Now, there's no way we could have looked through those volumes.
Within such a short space of time.
So
Yes,
those are the reasons why we're dealing with it. But so we will take it down to court.
So obviously you feel that now, I mean, if you explain it the way you do, obviously you feel that there seems to be an agenda that was driven. I mean, if there are people in some circles who are calling it, we'll just do an Esma Khashule on him. And what makes you believe, or what makes you think that there's such an agenda, and who's behind it? Who's behind an agenda like that?
Well, let me say, and I want us to separate the two issues. The investigation that we started in the department was justified. When the SIU was interested in it, it was justified. Their report is what I queried. I said their report is actually suggesting that they had a predetermined mind to actually find me guilty. It has nothing to do with the investigation.
With the investigation that you had commissioned, yes.
The investigation and things that were all about it, and all the mess about it. I even issued an apology at the time to say, look, I see there's a whole lot of things here that need to be investigated. I'm sorry about it, and that's it. But then, when they come with a report, that's when I'm taking issue with them. And insofar as that report refers to me, but insofar as it refers to the other thing, part of that report is what we've already found. So we separate the issues. Our issue is their drawing me in is wrong, and that's what I'm dealing with. And so we need to take the matter up, get it closed, and then of course we take the next steps after that.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then obviously there are those who want to understand who Dr. Mkhize is and what does he stand for in terms of his ideological disposition. A lot of the engagements that I have, people are saying, okay, yeah, we understand. Okay, we see all the other issues, but what does Dr. Mkhize stand for? What is his ideology? We're in a country where black businesses are constantly under the microscope. Bank accounts are being closed for black entrepreneurs and for black-owned conglomerates. But yet white people or white businesses rather, they seem to be getting away with murder. They get away with so many things with impunity. Like for instance, let me just ask you, what are your thoughts on the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, for instance?
Well, let me first start by saying what brought me onto the public service was the mission of the African National Congress to liberate South Africa from oppression, discrimination, poverty, and all its ramifications. And therefore liberate the people of South Africa, black people in general, Africans in particular. As long as we haven't fulfilled that mission, then I believe that we must continue to stand up. Now, we will stand up and deal with those issues irrespective of what we would have been able to do in the past and what we might still need to do in the future and what the weaknesses we might be having and all the frailties of human frailties that we might have. But ever at the end of the day, we need to be loyal to that mission. And that mission, for me, basically says there's inequality in South Africa. There is poverty, there is unemployment, there is crime. It's all related. It was by design. It didn't just happen accidentally. I've done a bit of research, and I can tell you now that the structure of the government, even this one, but the structure of the government had been there originally set to preserve a colonial kind of an economy, which extracts from South Africa and sends to transmit to the colonial country. Now, when apartheid ended, even as the successive constitutions came about, it only tampered with the structure of the government insofar as it served this minority, in the country, but it didn't tamper with the economy. So at this point, we need an economy that services the majority of the people of South Africa. So I stand for transformation. Make sure that we need to grow this economy. Make sure that it is much bigger, it accommodates more people, but it must also be somehow democratized, so that when you see the large institutions, you must see that the majority of the institutions are owned or managed or directed by the majority of the black people. Otherwise, you cannot continue to have a minority-led economy. You need to broaden it, and that for me is one most important issue. Therefore, we're going to have to deal with the issues of inequality. When we spoke about the issue of more radical socio-economic transformation, it was meant to look at how do you address the fact that over the many years, you have a majority of the people who are not in control of the resources of the country. So you have a situation where 10% of the population actually controls 80% of the economy, and 80% of the population shares 10% of the economy. So you need to deal with it, because South Africa is more unequal now than it was during the days of apartheid. And that cannot be that you can have a democratically elected government that presides over worse inequalities than before. And so the issue of poverty, right now, we need intervention, because the poverty we have today, whilst we've been making progress for the past few years, but of course we've now started suffering. Unemployment, same, is actually gotten worse from the time up to what it is now. So the ANC conferences took a number of decisions, land expropriation without compensation, the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, and the whole package of resolutions. Those resolutions were basically meant to say, what can we do differently so that we can address inequality and poverty? And so I think that in our situation, we need to continue to explore all the means that we can use so that we can rebuild the economy, but we must also make sure that more and more people can be absorbed in the economy.
Yeah, but now, obviously with these resolutions that were taken back in 2017 at the policy conference, none of them have been implemented. You look at your land expropriation, nationalization of the Reserve Bank, radical economic transformation as a policy of the ANC. It hasn't been implemented at all. Yet we find ourselves in an even worse situation than we were in. Is this not an indictment on the leadership of the ANC and how the ANC has, been out of touch with the realities that the people that are facing? And if so, what are you going to do differently, since you are the presidential hopeful for the party?
I think we need to understand that the formation of the ANC was largely to serve the majority, the poor, the marginalized, and therefore what we need to first do is to hold a sense of drift, right-wing drift of the ANC, where it looks like it only deals with the elite, it deals with only those who are in control of wealth and all the resources. But we need the ANC to show that it is able to assist, to actually bring up the quality of life, the living conditions, and the life of all the people to be better. That, I think, for me, is very, very important. So I think for the start, going into the next conference, before you start thinking about too many new policies, what I would like to focus on is implementation. Let's take action. Let's get things to happen. There was a policy on, building infrastructure so that you've got more hospitals and more schools and so on. What is it that's stopping us from doing that? Because you can stimulate the economy using infrastructure build, rapidly, accelerated programs of that nature. We're talking about trying to get entrepreneurship up, black entrepreneur or black industrialists, small business support, cooperatives and all of that. Now we need to do that. We need to implement all of that, because it's when you are focusing on that as a government program, that you are able to create a framework that allows for entrepreneurs to grow and participate and create more jobs and so on. But that way you're going to start addressing the exclusion that has been there. And also government must use its leverage based on its procurement capacity, so that it can actually deal with that. If you go to India, there are a number of items. Initially, I think there were over 1,000 items, which government by law was obliged to buy from small businesses who had very small turnovers. And the government had to do that, because otherwise government is the biggest market. The government is the biggest consumer. So that needs to be actually acted upon. We have a provision for cooperative banks to be created, where all the stockfellers and all the small saving groups could actually be participating in the hawkers and all these partner shops could be, banking their money and actually getting support from the government is looking at a distance on those issues now. Why can't we actually implement all of those things? Because those are some of the interventions that we've seen. You know what I've seen in India? They could lend a lady so many rupees to buy a cow, and then they'll just live on milking this cow. Feed the cow, milk the cow, and then pay back for the milk and get your money back. But that is a project that has got 3 million farmers. It's the biggest dairy in India. Right? Amul dairy, that's what it's called. Now, this tendency towards allowing concentration movement towards monopolistic ownership of and corporatization of a lot of stuff that could have actually been handled by a variety of small players is where we're going wrong. And I'm saying it's only the policies of the ANC. And my approach would be, before we talk about what's new, let's talk about implement. Let's act on what can be acted on. Let's see what difference we can make by implementing. Now, I can give you an example here as well. When I was chairperson of the ANC and I was premier in the problem, we didn't need to wait for the Auditor General to know that the municipality didn't perform. We used to call ANC meetings where we would actually get each and every one of those councillors to account. And what they would do would basically come with a report and say this municipality is going to be bankrupt by such and such a period. How are we going to stop that? If those mayors don't agree or don't believe, then the executive sits down and say they don't have enough insights to run that municipality. They must be moved. You understand? And if we sat down, everybody knew. You're not talking to the public. First of all, you talk to the party leaders must hold you accountable before the public holds the party accountable. We don't have to wait for the complaint from the community, because you can monitor this and then say the way this thing is going. Why have you got such an over expenditure and so on? I gave the example in conference of one time when I was an MEC and Premier Ndebele was in charge of the project. So he goes on to a meeting, and now President Mbeki is in charge. President Mbeki, Premier Ndebele says, "Oh yeah, my province is being, underfunded." True, but in a context. So then President stops the discussion. He says, "Minister of Finance, it was Trevor Mendo, why are you underfunding this department, this province?" And then Minister Manuel pulled out a statement and said, "Well, President, in this department, the province is underutilized. The fund is going to be underfunded. Is going to be underspending in this and this." So then the president didn't even wait for that. He said, "Okay, Premier, explain to me why you should continue to be a premier in a province that's doing that." And so next meeting, go and ask your MEC what he would have done to correct it, but you will come back with a notice to him that tells him that he actually is in breach because he's not overseeing the department properly. I can tell you, when the premier went back, the departments, the heads of department, finance, and everybody had resolved the issue of underspending. It didn't happen after that. And then the point was, one, the focus of the leaders must be on the performance of those who are deployed in the government. And if they are able to focus on that, we can solve a whole lot of nonsense. A lot of councillors.
So it's clear there are no performance measurement mechanisms then that are put in place. I mean, if that's the case.
I wouldn't argue that. I would simply say my focus would be making sure that these things are implemented. And you want them implemented and hold people accountable. That is what you need before you go on to look at new other issues.
And then I just want to get your views on on this. The ANC performed very poorly in the previous municipal elections, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, especially in Gauteng. Key municipalities were lost. How would you, if you, I think, for instance, eThekwini, the ANC won eThekwini largely because of your activism, Esma Khashule, and others who had to intervene. But my thing is that if you win in December, how would you reverse the trend of the ANC losing ground? How would you gain back the ground that's been lost over the last 4 to 5 years?
I think we must first go back to the basics. People will vote for the ANC because the ANC is selling a product that they want. So if people are to be approached, and therefore we need to take all their concerns up and correct them. In a number of instances, it does not require new money. Basically, it requires better communication. In some instances, it requires a different attitude of those who are leading the community. But all in all, I think we need to actually focus on how to improve on service delivery, how to improve on communication with the public. Then we must go out and correct the wrongs that people are pointing out at us. We have to deal with issues of maladministration and corruption, and also creating a sense of a very competent machinery of government. And with that, we should then be able to set a target of energizing our community, rebuilding the trust. When people see that if we object against certain conduct and we are not happy with it, there can be action on that. That makes a huge difference. But also, when people have got problems that they raise, there should be quicker action, responsive government, and I believe that those are the things that you need to focus on.
Okay. And then look, we are about to wrap up, but I think I'd also just, what's your relationship like? It would be a crime if I don't ask these two questions at least. What's your relationship like with former President Jacob Zuma?
It's a normal relationship.
Are you on good terms?
Yeah, we're in good terms. Yeah, I will tell you, we've worked with President Zuma for years. Actually, he's the one leader that I've served under for very many years since I started. So there's been a lot of issues. We've worked together, we've done a lot of things to help the ANC, the public, and serve together in a number of areas. It doesn't mean that we've always agreed. There are times when we disagree. And we were able to keep the disagreements and manage them without anybody knowing. But in one instance, it came out into the public because when we were working as a part of the top six, there were some differences that were actually playing themselves out in the media. We sat down and resolved all of those issues. As we're going towards the 2017, with the different approaches to how to deal with the issue of preferences, we sat down at the end and we agreed as to what's the best way, what we could have done better, and we closed that chapter. We've been in touch, even in the past few months, we've been actually in touch, sitting with him, discussing how to support the leadership in KwaZulu-Natal and so on. When I spoke to him, I explained to him, for example, why I was actually going to be standing. And then I wasn't asking for an endorsement because it's always a bit tricky to get endorsement when you are the father, because everyone will come to you. But anyway, he's also got a view as to how the preference. So he did raise the fact that yes, he understands that, but he still wants to discuss with leadership. The fact that previously there was a different candidate, and so I was going to deal with that issue with the leadership. President Zuma is absolutely correct to have his preference, and it's no secret. If you would like to share it with anybody, like all the members, we all have, we can go around influencing others. It doesn't really make any difference. The fact that there's a preference doesn't make you enemy. It just means that there's the approach that we're taking. So we respect views, different views. As a matter of interest, I've got good relations with him. I've also got good relations with President Mbeki. In fact, I've had a meeting with him recently. And so for me, we need to always remember that these are our leaders. Therefore, our leaders that we have served with and have served under for a long time, there'll always be some wisdom that we need from them. And so that would be.
So is the line of communication still open between?
It's open.
It's
There's
open.
no.
Yeah.
There's no conflict or outstanding issue between me and President Zuma. Of course, if I've got a different view and he might be having a different view, I think we must accept that, we all have views. And so I don't see why we should make it such an issue.
And then, so just lastly, would you ever consider, since you're running for the presidency of the ANC, would you consider being deputized by a woman, or would you consider deputizing for a woman, or vice versa, or whichever way?
I have no problem serving with anybody, but it depends on what the branches have actually said. I'll give you an example. In 2017, I had branches who were actually proposing me for nomination in 2 positions, president, deputy president. Now that almost gave me a kind of discretion that I could, relook at what to do. So I had some discussion with some of the colleagues, including Minister Dr Zweli Mkhize, who was standing at the time. And when I withdrew after those kinds of considerations from the chair president. So I stood only for the deputy president. But then when we saw the level of tension within the organization, and we felt it was going to lead to a situation where there could even be a split,
a breakaway,
then I withdrew, and when we said Congress must concentrate on how we can try and keep a sense of unity in the ANC. So for me, I was quite happy to serve outside the officials, as long as we could have a situation where all the delegates could come back and say, we have something to defend in this leadership. And I thought that worked. Now, this time around, I don't have any discretion. I've only got nomination in one position. So I can't start saying, but don't nominate me here, give me that one, or give me that one. I think that would be rather imprudent, and I think we must respect the branches. They decide, listen, we think we want to nominate you here, and don't go around saying, actually, I don't like that. I want this.
You want this, you can't be choosing for yourself.
No, you don't do that. Instead, you must just feel honored that you've been considered, because there are over 1 million members in this organization, and literally anyone could have been asked. And therefore, we must acknowledge that and respect the fact that it's not my choice, it's my service that is being requested. It's not me choosing. I mean, literally, people came to me and asked me, please come into this thing. We see you've not been with the officials. We would like you to come in for this and this and these reasons. And then, of course, I was convinced, and I said, no, that's fine. Let me give it my best shot. And whatever I can do, I'm willing to do it. But then I can't again start saying, no, please, but yes, but not this one, but this one. I think it's not in keeping with our culture.
Yeah, okay. No worries. Bab Kabazen, I'd just like to say thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to engage with you, to be in conversation, and to get to know you as well. I'm so glad that you've given us your time from your busy schedule to come and talk to us. It's really an honor. Thank you so much. And yes, that concludes our conversation. And thank you very much, everybody, for those of you who've tuned in. This is it. Please look out for other clips and for our engagements on social media and on IOL for other aspects of this interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Cheers.